Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So we did a bit of testing on all of the classes with this Paranoid Delusion. Those now look pretty cool with those wings on the bard. We attack our dummy and yes indeed the Paranoid Delusion doesn't attack the target. So that's a 0 damage on it. For the Barbarian, the Paranoid Delusion uses an at-will which no longer exists, which is Wicked Strike. Many of the other companions actually have this too, but the Barbarian lost it with the release of Module 16. On the Cleric, it uses its Lance of Faith, as you can see. Unfortunately, it doesn't stay at ranged, as when it wants to do its fear power, it needs to be right up and close, and yeah, that means it's going to die a bit more. For the Fighter, it just simply uses the Cleave attack. On the Paladin, she simply uses the Shielding Strike ability. On the Ranger, unfortunately, it does not use the bow, it simply uses those axes, getting up close using Rapid Strike. On the Rogue we've seen before, she just goes and uses that Duelist Flurry, which is all single target damage, as you can see just there. And for the Warlock, it simply goes and uses the Eldritch Blast power, but again unfortunately is going to always remain nice and up close to the target, which can be a negative if your target deals a lot of AoE damage near it. And then on the Wizard, it simply uses the Chilling Cloud ability, again using it from pretty much melee range just there. Now how do all of these companions then compare with, let's say, running the Pseudodragon as an alternative? Now I've tested it on the Rogue already and shown you the results, and it's a pretty big bump up. About 25% damage increase by going with the Paranoid Delusion instead of the Pseudodragon. But how is it for the other classes? Well, here I have a very simple chart for you guys. You can see on the Barbarian, you lose about 24% damage. The 0% baseline is the Pseudodragon's damage, and then it's either higher or lower depending on which class you're running the Paranoid Delusion on. You can see that on the side. And for the Cleric, the Paranoid Delusion does a whopping 36% more damage than the Pseudodragon, which is crazy. Keep in mind, the Pseudodragon deals the same damage across all the classes when you have them on the same statistics. For the Fighter, you lose about 26% damage. For the Paladin, you lose about 19% damage. For the Ranger, you gain about 2% damage. So if you already have the Pseudodragon upgraded, I wouldn't bother switching. And then for the Rogue, you again gain about 25% extra damage, the Warlock only about 4%, and the Wizard you lose about 22%. And again you can see just the extra damage chart here, which you can see the encounter DPS across each of the classes, and then compared with the Pseudodragon dealing just over 40,000 encounter DPS. You can see there with the Cleric having it dealing up to 54.5 thousand encounter DPS. That's a massive increase from the Pseudodragon, and it could definitely be meta for a Cleric to run with the inactive companion. And then you have your Ranger, your Rogue, and the Warlock all having that increase, but unfortunately the rest of the classes gain, a very big loss. Like the Bard, you lose 100% of the damage because, yes, it doesn't attack. It doesn't do anything. So we go and add them to our companion document here, and we can get them ranked up. And as we can see, the Paranoid Delusion on the Cleric is coming out now on the top DPS for single target damage of any companion. Again, you'll have to be on a Cleric for it to deal that much damage. I have all of the other classes tested there as well. For the Rogue, the Warlock, and the Ranger, they all top out above the Pseudodragon, but you can see the Warlock and the Ranger only very slightly. And otherwise, the rest of them are filtered in there, and you can have a look for yourself. In my opinion, the Paranoid Delusion is not really a companion you want to pick up unless you're maybe a Cleric or a Rogue. And even then, most content, you may very well be better off with just running an augment companion to just increase your offensive stats so you yourself can output more damage, and that's more reliable because you have some brains. You can dodge those red areas. You're not going to die as often, most likely, than your companion if you have any skills. And in the alphabetical order, you can see them all listed here then just versus each other, with again the Bard dealing no damage when you run with the Paranoid Delusion. So again, hopefully this is somewhat clear and insightful as to the Pseudodragon's damage versus the Paranoid Delusion's damage across the different classes, and thus whether or not you should be using one instead of the Pseudodragon. Now, how did I get my companion to have the wings? Well, if I just go and dismiss her and resummon her while I have the wings, they give the wings to her and she can just stand around with the wings. That's pretty cool. I can't do that. So again, just don't go spending like 8 million on a Paranoid Delusion when it's not going to be really worth it for your class. And overall, try and focus on just increasing your own damage before you invest in something like a $1 million companion, when in fact it's not going to give you that much of an extra damage boost. Again, all of these tests were made with a mythic companion enhancement, and then as you can see on the document, those following particular stats. So if you want to test out your own companions and compare with what I have, you could just set yourself up with those stats and then you can get a direct comparison. And if there's any companion there you think is performing pretty well and I haven't tested, I do miss still a few here, need to work on catching up on them, then please let me know and I'll add it to my list to get it tested. I still have yet to do AoE companions, but in my opinion, from what I've seen, the rankings won't change and thus there's not a big need to test them just yet, but I'm working on it. I'll get there eventually, guys. My apologies. So again, if I presented this well, consider leaving the video a like. And if you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.